Welcome to another podcast episode of DIY Guitar Making. I also produce video episodes of DIY Guitar Making live in the workshop. To find both the podcasts and the videos all in one place, go to DIYguitarmaking.com. You can even subscribe to the email list there to receive new episodes, both the videos and the podcasts, directly in your inbox as they come out. Again, that's DIYguitarmaking.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about sourcing our own wood for guitar builds. Yay! So I'll be getting into ordering from online suppliers, which is the easiest way of doing it, and I'll also be talking about going to your local hardwood supplier and picking through the stacks and what to look for, all of that cool stuff. And lastly, what I'm going to talk about is processing your guitar plate material from raw materials, from the log, from the forest. And, just to give you a heads up, basically I'm going to be talking you out of attempting that. Or at least most of you. But anyway, that's what we're going to be getting into. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So when we're talking about sourcing wood for a guitar build, there are essentially three ways to go about this. One, there's simply ordering wood from an online supplier. Two, you can go to a local supplier yourself and actually pick through the stacks. And then three is actually sourcing the wood yourself, as in milling it from a log, say from a fallen tree, and then you have to go through the whole process of kiln drying it and or even just drying it out in the open. And we're going to talk about all three here, but we're going to start with the easiest one, which is ordering from an online supplier. And truly, if this is your first guitar build, I really want to recommend just doing it this way. You're going to have a lot on your plate as it stands already, and this is going to simplify things immensely. It's going to allow you to use woods that are guaranteed by the supplier to be at least of a certain quality that makes it acceptable for lutherie. When you're sourcing things yourself or milling them yourself, for the newbie, it's an attractive idea, but there are just so many pitfalls and so much to learn within the world of milling fresh lumber that I simply do not recommend starting off that way. But we're going to get into all of that, so let's go ahead and just get started. Again, starting with online suppliers and basically how to navigate that terrain. So first of all, you want to find a lutherie supplier and not just a hardwood supplier. There's a difference between the two. Hardwood suppliers are generally dealing with hardwood flooring people and furniture makers, and a variety of different contractors and cabinet makers, people like that. At a lutherie supplier, the tops and backs and side sets are all milled in a certain way that is appropriate for what you're going to be using it for. Not to mention they have their own specialized grading system, which exists just for the lutherie community. It's not to say that if you ended up at a hardwood supplier and if you had a little bit of knowledge already about sourcing lumber or sourcing wood yourself, it's not to say that you couldn't pick out a couple odd things there that might work in certain instances, but that would be the exception and not the rule. And again, if you're going in with a limited understanding of what you're looking for anyway, there's going to be nobody there to help you. And they're probably just going to end up selling you something off of their own sort of speculation about what they think you're trying to do with it. And by the way, just as a point of clarification, this is a podcast about acoustic guitar building, not electric guitar building. I wish I could speak more on the topic of electric guitars and solid bodies, but I simply don't build them myself. So whenever I'm talking about guitar building here, I'm talking about acoustic guitars specifically. I understand for a solid body, you can source wood in more conventional settings. Okay, so we've established that we're going to be looking at a Luthier Supplier, and there's a number of great online suppliers out there. I'm just going to name a couple that I've used and had good experiences with. There's Luthier's Mercantile International, also known as LMI. There's Stu Mac. There's Allied Lutherie, RC Tonewoods I've used, Alaska Specialty Woods. The two big names here are Luthier's Mercantile and Stu Mac. If you've been researching even just a little bit on this guitar making stuff, you've probably ran into one or both of those companies. They do tone wood and parts, and they also sell tools, especially Stu Mac. So Stu Mac I've always thought of as more of a tool company that also sells some tone woods. LMI is more of a tone wood company that also sells some tools. So if you're really looking for the greatest variety and abundance of options, I would go to LMI. It is kind of like your one-stop shop for luthier woods, tone woods. I mentioned RC Tone Woods. What I like about those guys is that you can order orphaned back pieces or orphaned side pieces. And especially with the orphaned side pieces, that's a really great thing because what you can do is order some practice side sets for bending. Because bending is something where you really do have to practice it a little bit before you commit whatever nice exotic piece of wood you've decided to use for your back and sides. Because there's a high chance that on your first go, you're going to either scorch the wood, break the wood, or just get compression marks in the waist. So anyway, I would check out RC Tone Woods just for the orphaned sets that they have. Orphaned, by the way, means that they don't have a full book-matched pair. They just have one half of that book-matched pair for whatever reason. Maybe there was a big knot on the other half, and so it was just unacceptable. Or more likely, when they were resawing out the book-matched pairs, they ended up with an odd number. And so what you've got is that extra odd piece. Alaska Specialty Tone Woods specializes in soundboard wood, your top wood. So they sell a lot of Sitka spruce, which makes sense, them being in Alaska. And I think you can get some pretty good prices on just top wood that way. So when you're browsing through these online catalogs, the first thing you need to know is the size of the instrument that you plan on building, because as you'll see, different back and side sets and book-matched pairs for soundboards are sized according to whether or not it's a dreadnought or an OM or a triple O or a classical guitar. It all depends on what guitar you plan on building. You don't want to get an OM size set if you're building a dreadnought guitar. You won't have enough width to cut out a dreadnought shape. Now, you can use a set designated for a dreadnought for an OM guitar. In fact, I do that all the time. So you may notice that a large portion of the guitars sets that are available out there are sized as a dreadnought. And if you like that particular set, yet you're building a smaller instrument, it's usually only just like a couple of bucks more to get the dreadnought size. And if you just happen to like that particular set, I go ahead and order that one. And yeah, there's just a little bit more waist cut off, but it's not a big deal. Probably, in fact, the majority of OM sets that I get and cut out are marked as either dreadnought or jumbo. So the key takeaway here then is to know the size guitar that you plan on building and then to select a set that is either that size or bigger. And just so you know, an OM is bigger than a classical, a dreadnought is bigger than an OM, a jumbo is bigger than a dreadnought. Another reason that they draw that dreadnought or OM shape onto the book match sets is in order to help them grade that particular piece. So they'll draw that shape onto the two pairs of the book match set, And what they're looking for is an area on that set where they can fit that whole shape that will exclude any blemishes like knots or just areas where the grain really runs out. So basically by drawing that shape, they can then exclude everything outside of the shape in the grading process and just focus on what will exist within the shape of that instrument. So in that way, it can be graded as a AAA grade top within that dreadnought shape that they've drawn. Which is good to know, because if you pay a lot of money for a AAA top and you get it in the mail and it comes to you and there's a big ugly knot like up in the corner somewhere, don't get upset. If it's outside of that outline, well, then they didn't gyp you on anything. They understand that when you cut out the shape of that guitar, that's all going to be waste. So what are they grading this based on? Well, I already mentioned on the lower end of the grading scale are just things like blemishes. So knots and really run out grain. You're only going to see that on the lowest quality of tops. But as you get up into the higher, the AA, AAA, there's even 4A. There might even be 5A in some places, but that's crazy. I don't know why. That's just sort of a bastardization of the whole system at that point. It should really only go up to 4A, and I think in most cases it does. I think when you're rating something as 5A, you're doing that as a marketing ploy just to sell that and say it's above somebody else's grading system. But anyway, I digress there. What was I saying? I was saying that the point of the grading system beyond the very low seconds is to look for A, the straightest grain possible, and B, the largest number of grain lines. So a good top has very tight grain lines, and those grain lines don't converge or diverge away from each other, and they don't run out. As far as the species of wood you can find for a top, Sitka is the most common and is even despite it being a very common wood, it's actually a phenomenal wood. Some would argue it's the best for top wood. There's also other alternate spruces to that. There's Engelmann spruce, Adirondack spruce. There's some other ones, Lutz spruce. Then there's the cedars as well. Western red cedar is fairly common for top woods. In fact, I've used that more than I've used spruce. I happen to kind of like Western red cedar, except for the fact that it's brittle. So actually, when you're working with it, it is easy to accidentally break that wood, to fracture that wood along one of its many grain lines. So that's just something to be aware of. In fact, always when you're picking out woods, you want to be thinking not just of the final result that you're trying to produce, but also of the workability of that wood, especially if you're new to guitar building, and even more especially if you're new to woodworking, because then you really have a learning curve when it comes to handling and working that wood. And if it's a particularly cantankerous piece of wood, then you're going to have some serious problems, and you're probably not going to have a lot of fun while you're building this guitar. So with that said, just keeping it simple with Sitka spruce is probably your best bet. Personally, I experiment with a lot of different soundboard woods, but I always keep the grading of that wood high. So actually, I'm not opposed to using different species of wood, but I'm more consistent with just keeping it at a high enough grade so that the quality within that species is high. That's just my way of approaching it. Other builders are more hard set on certain species. I'm more hard set on high quality within the species. Now, most of the woods you'll be using for your guitar will be more or less quarter sawn. I didn't talk about that too much here because if you're going with the online suppliers, you don't really have to worry about that yourself. They're going to make sure that in the cases where quarter sawn is needed, that it will be quarter sawn or at least mostly quarter sawn, because the truth is we're running out of, in a lot of stocks of different various species, we are running out of really good quarter sawn material. And I'm speaking globally as far as the global supply is concerned. So there just isn't the same quality of wood available. And so as builders, we have to let our expectations fall just a little bit. But anyway, next we'll be talking about sourcing wood locally at your local tonwood supplier, if you have one. And in that case, understanding the difference between flat sawn and quarter sawn becomes a little bit more important and incumbent upon you to understand. My favorite way of obtaining tonewoods is going to the local supplier. And the local supplier that I go to is Hearn Hardwoods. They actually have a separate section of Hearn Hardwoods, which is called Hearn Tonewoods. But if you look for them online, you don't really see, they don't have their own website yet for Hearn Tonewoods, as far as I understand. I don't know why they don't, because it's like this fantastic little hidden gem. I feel like there aren't too many luthiers out there who know that it even exists. So at some point, I guess they'll make a better website for the tonewood section specifically. But right now, you actually can't really find it except to go there yourself. So you go there, you ask for the luthier section or the tonewood section, and they'll send you over to a separate building where there are just stacks upon stacks of really excellent tonewoods, soundboard material, back and sides, neck blanks, fretboard blanks, bridge blanks, everything. In fact, they actually supply a lot of the materials for major brands like Martin, I think Fender, I think they supply as well, Breedlove. And everything that I described before in relation to online suppliers is going to apply here. So they're going to have the outlines drawn on the book-matched pairs in order to grade them, and so you can see that you're going to have enough width out of that material to get the cut that you need. And what's nice about being able to pick through the stacks like this is that you can actually feel the wood. You can flex it a little bit. You can feel how much it weighs, and you can tap the wood. And this might seem a little silly at first. You should feel a little silly the first time you're tapping on the wood, because if somebody walks up and asks you, hey, what are you listening for? You kind of have to admit that you don't know what you're listening for. And even today, I still don't quite know what I'm listening for when I tap on wood, but I always do it anyway. It just adds sort of like data points in my mind as to what I'm tapping and how long the sustain of that tap, that little percussive sound you get from the tap, how long that sustains when I listen to it, which is pretty meaningless the first time you do it, but as you do it more, you start to have something to compare that tap against. And you just start to develop a sense of what you're looking for, which is this bell-like tone that you can get from a really good sounding top. Now, of course, the material here isn't thicknessed down, so you have to just kind of realize that as you're tapping along, but everything there is thickness to approximately the same dimension, so there's a relative scale you can work with. But really, don't overthink that. In fact, if you don't want to do that at all, you really don't have to. You can just judge tops visually by how tight the grain lines are and how straight the grain lines are without any excessive run out. And then, of course, also all of the soundboard material should be well quarter sawn. For back and sides, it can be less quarter sawn, even flat sawn. Well, at least for the back. For the sides, actually, you do want it to be pretty well quarter sawn. But for the back, you can sacrifice some of that quarter sawn for more of a flat sawn piece. In fact, some people do this intentionally because they like that cathedral look that you get from flat sawn material on the back. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the plates here, but let's also talk about the other parts of the guitar that you can pick up from your local supplier, like neck blanks. So what you're looking for with a neck blank, I'd say more so than anything else, is that quarter sawn grain. and as little run out as you can get on a long enough piece for the neck. Because here's the thing, the neck blank is of a considerable enough length where even on a good piece you should expect, at least nowadays with the degradation of the stocks that we have available, you should expect a certain amount of run out on one end or the other of your neck blank. But generally speaking, it should be pretty straight and it should be pretty quarter sawn. You wouldn't want a rift sawn or especially not a fully flat sawn neck blank. The stability of the wood is of prime importance here with the neck blank because that wood is going to move a little bit, and the more stable that wood is, the less it's going to move. So your gold star kind of wood here for stability is going to be Honduran mahogany. That's why it's used so commonly. Not to mention, its workability is fantastic. So if you're new to guitar building or new to woodworking in general, you really want to go with something that has really great workability for the neck because you're going to be carving that neck, and especially if you're carving it with edge tools like a spoke shave, chisels, card scrapers, things like that. If you have wood that really tends to kind of tear out along the grain, it's going to be that much harder for you to do a good job carving the neck. So again, I would lean towards Honduran mahogany if you can get it for its stability and its workability. It also has a great stiffness to weight ratio, which is of course is important because it has to hold up against all that string tension. As an alternative, another wood that I personally like is Port Orford cedar. You don't see it a lot as guitar necks, but I think it's an excellent wood for that, and it's kind of cool that you don't see it a lot, so it gives you something a little bit unique about your guitar, something to make it stand apart to use a wood like Port Orford cedar. And as a side bonus to Port Orford cedar, when you're working it, it smells fantastic. It really does. It just has this awesome cedary smell. Some people hate it, actually, I should warn you, but it's one of those things. Either you hate it or you love it, and I love that smell. So just a couple other parts of the guitar to talk about. I actually talked about the fretboard just a little bit in the last episode. So there you want quarter sawn again, but ideally quarter sawn, but you can get away with flat sawn there, which I talked about why in the last episode. The bridge, likewise, quarter sawn is ideal. For bracing stock, you want as quarter sawn as you can get. Bracing is typically spruce or cedar, so some kind of softwood. Sometimes people use mahogany, which is a hardwood, but typically it's a softwood, and it is really hard. That's the one area where I see the most degradation. Degradation isn't the right word. The most sort of drift away from quarter sawn in the material as time goes on. So it used to be you could get perfectly quarter sawn bracing stock. Now it's just getting ever so slightly more rift sawn, it seems, as time goes on, and we just kind of accept a little bit more of rift sawn material. I don't know if that has to do with the size of the tree, probably, for spruce trees, but yeah, bracing stock, try to get quarter sawn, but if it's a little bit rift sawn, that's okay. So lastly, now I'm going to talk about the most extreme form of sourcing your own material, and that is to truly source your own material, as in to get it from the forest. So a tree on the forest floor, or maybe your neighbor has some logs that were cut down from a tree that fell on the power lines or something. This is the kind of thing that I understand why it's tempting. There's this romantic notion of knowing exactly where the materials of your instrument that you're now playing, knowing exactly where those came from. And I'm actually going to be working on, over the winter, maybe early next spring, I'm going to be doing exactly that. I have some logs that we cut from a cherry tree that fell onto a horse farmer's electric fence. Me and my friend went out and we cut them up into rounds, And at some point, I'm going to film this too and make it an episode of DIY guitar making, one of the video episodes. And I'm going to mill up some boards that can be used for tops and backs. Whether I ever use them for tops and backs, well, not for tops, I'm sorry, but I meant to say just for backs. But whether I ever use them, I'm not sure, but I want to at least cut some up just to go through that process and to share it with you guys, and possibly I'll actually, build a guitar from these in the future. And that will be cool because it will be the first guitar that I've essentially harvested from the forest floor. Pretty cool, right? Now, this is a cool thing to do, I think, if you're just building as a hobby and you're not trying to build a lot of instruments, you're not trying to sell them or anything like that, then it's just a really cool thing to do. You can pass it down to your grandchildren or something like that and just share the story of this guitar. But I do want to caution you, if you are trying to get into guitar making to sell guitars, you may get excited about the idea that, say, a neighbor who has some logs and you can save money and profit more by using this essentially free material. But I want to first explain to you just how not free this material is when you actually consider the immense amount of work and time you have to put into processing these logs to get just a few back and sides out of. Because that's the real truth of it too. The vast majority of that log is going to be useless to a luthier. That's why we go to these suppliers to get this material, because they are part of a vast network that basically processes these logs and takes all the various parts that they pull out of the log and splits it up between, these billets are going to hardwood flooring suppliers. This over here is going to go to this other hardwood supplier that sells specifically to cabinet makers. And then this tiny portion is going to be what is acceptable to luthiers. So if you're processing rounds, logs yourself, and you're not a part of that network, there's a huge amount of waste. Of course, you could try to build your own furniture out of all the other materials, but, that's all time that you could spend building guitars instead of trying to figure out what to do with all the rest of the tree. Or you could just cut it into firewood and burn it. What I'm trying to get across here is just to paint a more realistic picture of what this romantic notion of cutting up a log to process into guitar parts is really like. And then also the other side of this is that the equipment that you need to process this for back and side sets is much more serious than the equipment you would need to get into guitar making if you were just purchasing back and side sets from suppliers. Most guitar makers, even well-known high-end guitar makers, are just purchasing their back and side sets from Luthier suppliers because it just makes sense economically. It makes sense if you value your time and you value the art of guitar building itself. It makes sense that you wouldn't want to spend this great amount of time and effort on processing the material before you can even begin with guitar making. So with that said, if you don't have on-demand access to a facility that can process this wood efficiently, and you're doing this for reasons of saving money by getting the material for cheap or for free, I think you're barking up the wrong tree, and your needs are better served by going to hardwood suppliers that are already a part of this lumber processing network. Now, like I said, I'm going to be cutting up this log later in the winter or in early spring, but I'm doing that more as a novelty. I'm not doing it for any practical reasons. It's not a sustainable practice. In fact, it's going to be a shitload of work, and I'm not super excited about it in that way, but I am excited about it in other ways because it is kind of cool. And basically the reason why I can justify this amount of extra work is because I film things and I present them to you and I teach in that way. So I'm just kind of doing it for you guys as a cool, novel thing. So I won't say any more about that, but hopefully in the future I'll have some videos out on processing from the log. If you enjoyed this and you learned something here, please subscribe and leave a review on whatever platform that you are enjoying this on at the moment. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaeferguitars.com. Or you can register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania. Bye for now.